right, our first panel discussion. This is very exciting. We are very fortunate to have 5 subject matter experts join us on the platform now, discussing unraveling the complexity, social science and public policy, research in addressing the wicked problems. So first, we are very privileged to have Dr. Margo on Felius, a lecturer in financial crime at Griffith University. Margo is an accomplished lecturer in financial crime at the Academic of Excellence in Financial Crime, Investigation in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice. She is also a former Queensland Police Service detective with dual master's degrees in economics and business, as well as insurance economics, complemented by a background in policy, finance roles across government and non-government sectors. And that she did the year after she finished school. Research interests encompass multiple aspects of policing, emphasizing multi-agency partnerships, third-party collaborations, gender-based violence crimes, financial crime and organized crime structures, including money laundering. Margo, if you'd like to join us. Now for the second part of our buffet, Dr. David Rubens. Dr. David Rubens has 3 professorships, one from the United Nations University, European Center for Peace and Development, and also heads up the Strategic Risk Crisis Management. He holds a doctorate in security and risk management and is also a visiting lecturer and dissertation supervisor at Leicester University. Dr. Rubens, would you like to come and join us on the platform, please? Next, we have Johnston, who's an associate professor at Griffith University School of Criminology and Criminal Justice. Johnston holds a PhD from Rutgers University, previously served as a project director at the Center for Crime Prevention Studies. Johnston is also a senior research associate at the Police Foundation for Washington, D.C., renowned for research on crime and hotspots, crime public health correlation, and the influence of emerging technology on police practices. And Johnston is also the recipient of the 2013 Young Entrepreneurial Scholar Award and the 2016 Award for Outstanding Experimental Field Trial. Notable publications in esteemed journals, including Criminology, the Journal of Experimental Criminology, and Justice Quarterly. And clearly this is not Justin's first rodeo because he knows the rules very well. Welcome, Justin. And finally, rounding out this panel is Dave Bartlett, who's an industry fellow at the Academy of Excellence in Financial Crime Investigation and Compliance at the Griffith Criminology Institute. David is also a consultant criminologist with over 20 years of experience in government. He's also an expert in governance, risk and compliance challenges with an academic background in psychology, criminology and business. Justin is also recognized for strategic risk management and prevention of fraud, cybercrime, corruption, and compliance challenges. Welcome, David, and it's a great pleasure to have you. Expert in moderating this panel is our very own Dr. Paul Johnston, who's the lead risk consultant and internal behavioral scientist for the Risk to Solution Group. Paul has over 30 years of operational and management experience in consulting. He's a fellow of many risk management and security organizations, more than the page could handle. Expert in public safety, security, risk management, and organizational psychology. And Dr. Paul is also focuses on evidence-based behavioral science and cultural change. Doctor, over to you.
First of all, I'd like to extend Dave's warm welcome to our esteemed colleagues on the panel this morning. And of course, before we actually get into the topic, which is Dave has mentioned, is unravelling the complexity of social science and public policy research in addressing wicked problems, I'd like to start with a statement before I throw a question to the panel. And David actually touched upon this this morning, is that quite often academia is criticised for not producing students with the skills for critical thought, nor delivering our research deliverables, which actually enables us to actually address these wicked problems. Now, I'm sure we all have our own opinions on that, and I'm preaching to the converted. But the first question I'd like to throw to the panel, I might actually ask Justin his thoughts first, is how well placed do you think academia is to indeed address wicked problems?
Sorry. I'll just jump right in. Thank you. I think academia is able to provide some of the connective tissue that fuses subject matter experts' ideas across different industries. I think we're in a unique situation. Malcolm Gladwell would say that academics provide a bridge to connect different operational languages and strategic perspectives. And then I'll just add one more comment in relation to that. Because of this, we often have the resources and time to explore how other jurisdictions and countries deal with different wicked problems. And as a result of that, we're able to develop comprehensive lit reviews. It may not be possible to unilaterally take stock of what's happening globally for many agencies that are dealing with high demand. So I think we are in a unique situation. Also, I think we're pretty good at detecting confirmation biases that tend to be embedded within certain industries. And I think a lot of academics tend to try to approach things from a different perspective. Simple.
If I could also extend the same question to David, because I know you've been on one of our recent programs, so we've had some really good discussions about these sort of topics.
We have. Thanks, Paul. I just want to touch on the topic of students and do universities prepare students enough for the real world, for industry? I think it's a really interesting question. I think I'll start by saying that universities have metrics around employability. And I think that's really powerful. If industry can tap into those and sort of encourage universities to see that they need to be promoting student outcomes in terms of employment, because that's what some of the key metrics are around government. It's a really, really interesting thing. So some of us as academics have real world experience, and we tend to have set assessment items that teach students the frameworks and things like that they need. And that's what David touched on earlier about the value of academia is teaching people methodologies and frameworks and those sorts of things. But it's about teaching them how to apply them and letting them actually have free ability to play in assessment items and apply these theories and methodologies to new problems. And I think that there's those of us that sort of work in the real world love that. We love setting assessment items where students can sort of take something and play with it in a real world setting. So I think that do we teach students how to actually operate? We teach them the skills they need. I think some people do, absolutely. But I think there's a phenomenal opportunity here for industry to connect with universities, particularly around creating structures and processes for informing what is taught in universities, particularly when universities have those metrics around student outcomes and employability. So I know at Griffith, for example, we have industry advisory boards. So I imagine a number of universities probably have industry advisory boards and things like that you could jump onto and actually inform the curriculum and those sorts of things. So I think it's probably developing maturity in that student education space. I don't think it's a basket case that some people think it is, but I think we just it's developing maturity, and there's the ability there for industry to work with universities better.
I think we're actually starting to see the introduction of a new term, of course, is pracademics. So practical academics, where we do actually get that balance right. And I could just ask your thoughts on that, Margo, with your background in policing as well as academia.
It's very interesting. Obviously, I did economics first, and then one day I was driving to work and I thought that this is not going to be the rest of my life. So I joined the police service from the bottom up, uniform into detective. And then sometimes academics come who wants to do research with us. And I was really thinking, you don't really know anything. What do you know about real policing? And it was really a bit antagonistic towards researchers. But the further I in my career in policing, I really took on board, we can actually learn something from academia. And then I left the police, did a PhD, so obviously I completely switched. But now I do still do a lot of research with police. And then again, I deal with, constables, senior constables, and they are again very much from what you can't tell us anything, So I think there is definitely a gap there. And for academics to become more involved, especially with people at the lower end of the organization, because they are there at the coalface. They understand what is happening at the coalface, and it might be only in this little bubble. But if you can learn from them what happens in their little bubble, then we can extrapolate that and see what can happen in the bigger bubble. So I definitely agree with that. And just touching on what David said about, I'm developing a financial crime course at master's level, and I'm putting a lot of stuff in there, what I have learned as a detective in financial crime and organized crime. But I would love to learn from, like the financial sector, what would they like to see? Because there's now the anti-money laundering and the counter-terrorism financing legislation. What are you looking out for? What would you like to see in the course? Because hopefully those students I have in my course, they're doing the course because they want to be employed in that sector. So, but what are you looking for? I don't really know. So there's definitely that gap there, an opportunity. Yeah.
Opportunity. And David, I saw you taking copious notes there.
Every good question, it's a good question because at the end you've got 30 more questions. And it springs off. So you mentioned the word pracademic, and I consider myself a pracademic. So I'd like to take it from two perspectives, one the academic perspective and one the practitioner perspective. From the academic perspective, two of the great academics we have in this field are Patrick Lagadec and Arjun Boyd. Some of you may know them. I've interviewed both of them for the ISRM. But the question I've asked them is, where are the new conceptualists? Because all of the work that we're using in academia comes from the 1990s and the 2000s. And even the work that they do is referenced in the 1990s and the 2000s. Where are the conceptualists of the 2020s? And I don't think that, I genuinely don't think they're there. There's work coming out which is very, it's basically repetitive. But it is not, these guys invented what we now know as the academic understanding of risk management. We don't have the conceptualists, and I think we need them. I'm not sure where they're going to come from. In terms of the practitioner experience, there's a phrase that some of you may have heard in meetings, with all due respect. And I always get to laugh because you know that if somebody says with all due respect, you know this is going to be interesting. In academia, we have a similar phrase. So if Professor Jones is talking, and I think Professor Jones is, does anybody know what a ftonker is, by the way? Do you know what a ftonker is? Do you know what a plonker is?
Yes.
A ftonker is a plonker with a PhD. So there's no sort, there's no shortage of flonkers. Once you get to know them, there's no sort of flonkers. So you think that Professor, you like that, don't you?
Yeah, I did like that.
You must be a thanker. I'm not going to talk about that. Okay, but so I think that Professor Jones is a ftonker. You say, Professor Jones, thank you for your presentation. And then you say, interesting theory. And if an academic says to another academic, and that's an interesting theory, you're about to start a 30-year war. I mean, basically, and everybody knows that. And that's basically the jab. That's just a jab, and they're going to knock the guy out. So you say, Professor Jones, thank you for your presentation. Interesting theory. I'm not sure where I see the impact. And if you say I'm not sure where I see the impact, it means, well, who the hell cares, bro? I mean, who cares? You've written a book, you've done a presentation. Who cares? Show me the impact. I think the question we have to ask is, if we've been doing this for 40 years, where's the impact? Where's the impact? Why are we making the same stupid mistakes time after time? Why are we not getting better? And I think that we as a community have got to ask ourselves the questions. Why are our voices not being heard? Because the thing that we know absolutely is, these are not wicked problems. I have a phrase now, we do not have a problem with climate change. We do not have a problem with climate change. Our problem is human stupidity. And if you want to try and talk about how do we deal with climate change without thinking about how do we deal with human stupidity and greed, it doesn't make sense. Let's deal with human stupidity. So that's where I think we can bring it to the game. We understand this stuff. It's not voodoo. It's good, strong process management. We know how to do it. What we need to do is get our voice in the room. We've got to have that influence. And then I think it's a question we ask ourselves.
I received a question from Anonymous here, but before I do, there's a question I'd like to ask the panel again. I'll just blanketly put it to you, because we've touched upon this in some of the comments. Do you think that the traditional academic silos are impacting on our ability to do this in terms of that transdisciplinary research? You said the conceptualized, we're just not getting it at the moment.
I think that you raised an important issue, which is the level of creativity that's coming out of academic work. I think there's been a change over the last 20 years. Universities reward academics differently. There's different metrics for performance. And increasingly, academics are promoted based on publications. And publications oftentimes are these empirical pieces where they slice this. A lot of academics call it slicing the salami, and you're testing small hypotheses. It actually takes a lot of brain energy and a lot of time to develop conceptual work from the ground up to write a book. And increasingly, universities are not rewarding academics as much for those types of endeavors, especially academics early in their career. We're trying to get tenure. So I think this is a problem, and this is an ongoing structural problem that we need to kind of deal with. And I'll just mention one thing in terms of the silos. I think that the concept of pracademic is really important. But I think there's a rival concept on the other side, which I call academicianer. Which is that I came from the Police Foundation, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C., where we thought about technologies around police organizations, how to manage police resources. And I came from that applied background, and then I came to university later, and I always found myself in between with one foot in one pond and one foot in the other. But I think it's really important that academics actually understand the operational settings in which emergency management, police, social workers function. And right now I have currently an arrangement with Victoria Police as an embedded criminologist, and they bring me in on a regular basis to deal with sensitive political issues, to work on evaluations, to develop operations. And the last thing I'll say around this is I think that the most interesting collaborative work happens in informal communications where people feel comfortable disagreeing with each other, and you can just pick up the phone and call somebody at 10:30 at night. And I have that relationship with an assistant commissioner and a superintendent in Victoria Police, and that's where I think the magic happens.
Okay, any other comments on the concept of traditional academic silos?
I think what we've done is we're talking about integration and the wider perspective. I see the opposite. I see it getting much more specialized, and not just specialized but isolated. We're going back into the silo thing. I think I like that academicianer. My experience is, and with no disrespect to anybody in this room, but in the American universities, many of those people are not what I consider academics. They're storytellers. They're ex-FBI guys, ex-Secret Service guys, but they do not have the rich, powerful academic background that gives you the things. And the classic example is someone like Stan McChrystal, who I know very well. We've done work with, and I love him very much, but he's a storyteller. He tells stories. And I think that there is something in genuine academic understanding that brings real value. And I'm lucky, I'm an academic for hire, so I do this all over the world, in universities all over the world. And I think that you have the classic thing, you have 20% which are excellent, 60% disappear, and 20% are really, really bad. But I have to say that the 20% who are excellent are incredibly impressive. I mean, actually, every time I work with universities, I'm always enthused that we have a genuine generation of young people coming through who are committed and get it and really are bringing some powerful energy to the conversation. The question is how we, again, allow them to have their voices heard.
I saw you hinting there.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. No, I think the other thing is that we're starting to see structures develop that break down silos. I think that's actually a good thing. A bit of a plug. Actually having a centre for the study of wicked problems actually creates a structure where people can come together and talk about specific problems as opposed to their specific discipline. And we see that across universities in a few different places where they're actually structuring research teams, multidisciplinary research teams around different types of themes. The other thing is that I think governments are getting a little bit more savvy around how they procure research, and they're actually asking for those multidisciplinary lenses to problems. And I know a number of contracts I've looked at the moment, where they sort of say, we want someone that basically, we want to bring law, we want to bring in a bit of sociology, we want to bring in a range of disciplines to look at this problem, because everyone brings a unique lens. So I think that there is the opportunity there to sort of harness some of those changes, but certainly creating the structures and think about how you procure research. If you're in government, you can certainly break down some of those silos.
Thank you. Margo?
Yeah, I just wanted to say about those silos. Yes, I agree, and yes, I don't agree. I think what is the issue is.
You haven't said it's an interesting theory, Lisa.
Well, it is interesting. Sorry. So I think the silo concept is interesting, because the problem is, if you have different academics for different fields, they all speak a very different language, and that language does not translate. To give you an example, I'm in the Financial Crime Academy, so most of my work is with business and economics, and then it's criminology. I'm fortunate that I understand both, but really to bring it all together, we've got criminologists there and business, and it does not. There are issues there because they don't understand each other, so that causes friction. So I think we definitely need to work more into getting multidisciplinary teams, but also once you set them up, to give these teams the time to get to know each other and to learn the language from each other. It's the same with a real language. You're not going to send somebody to the Netherlands and make them speak Dutch in the same day. And it's the same with different academics in different fields. They have to get to know each other, have to get to understand the language they are speaking.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say about that. I mean, in one of the universities that I'm involved in, which is University of Portsmouth, they have 5 separate departments of risk: criminology, business, one is policing, and then one to do with emergency response. None of them talk to each other, and actually they can't work out why they should talk to each other. So if we have that within our own universities, then once we go outside that, I think it's just a simple. It's a representative of some of the problems we face, challenges we face.
100%, and that's been an observation I've had in terms of industry, where we have a lot of organisations state we have a multidisciplinary team, but what they mean, we employ a lot of disciplines. And I think we're coming to even more specialised and more siloed, the more we actually do that. But I did my PhD years ago. Someone actually asked me, commented that we're getting so specific that sooner or later we'll be a specialist in nothing. Always a primer as you're halfway through your thesis when you hear something like that. But it goes to the next question then. What are the industry-based trends that you've noticed into researching and actually applying these wicked problems in real-world terms? So actually industry-based research.
Yeah, I was going to talk about all the great areas that we're moving towards, including harm reduction for vulnerable population, et cetera. But I'm actually going to take a little bit of a negative turn in an exciting way, which is that I think we have a growing problem about how we assess and evaluate knowledge and information. The world is increasingly information rich and knowledge poor. And we were starting to evaluate the quality of empirical evidence very differently. And this has long-term implications. A simple example, I was just reading a summary of the Cochrane collaboration meta-analysis evaluating the impact of mask mandates in the United States. The Cochrane collaboration has done a lot for evidence-based medicine, medical policy. Anyways, the Cochrane collaboration findings across all of these studies on mask mandates finds that masks unambiguously did not impact serious hospitalizations and infections. But yet Anthony Fauci is saying, well, if you wear a mask, especially if you're vulnerable, you're much less likely to get the virus. So the question is, how can you have these two the top scientists in the world, right, conduct a meta-analysis and collect all of the information around all the major experiments, randomized trials here, and they say mask mandates don't work. But then you have the top medical experts also saying that on an individual level, if you wear masks, they work. Well, that's because you're talking about two different things. The impact of a mask mandate, the policy of a mask mandate, applies to a geographic area. The state adopts a mask mandate. But the impact of wearing a mask, an individual wearing a mask, is very different. A mask mandate affects everyone in that state, but not everyone in that state is disrupted, because not everyone in that state decides they want to wear the mask because for whatever reasons, right? So you have a mask mandate here that's applied to all these people, but only half of them wear a mask, which creates all these problems. But anyways, this creates an ecological fallacy. We take information gathered at the geographic level and try to apply it to the individual or vice versa. Anyways, these are really important conversations to have, and academia can help to kind of flesh out these issues. But increasingly, we view many industrialized countries, we're increasingly viewing academia and science specifically through hostile lenses. And we're not having these conversations anymore about thinking more critically and evaluating empirical evidence the same way.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that is that it's increasingly difficult for us to obtain data sets. So to do real research, you need data. So whether that's policing data, another government agency, data from the financial institutions, they are very reluctant to give you data to do research on. So, and because of that, if we don't have real data, then it becomes very hard to come up with understanding the real problem and even real solutions. So an alternative to that is to create a synthetic data set. But then again, you need to go back to the industry because they then need to verify whether that data set is actually reflective of the data set we would like to use. So I think that's definitely one of the problems what these academics face if we are being asked to do real life or realistic research if we are not being given realistic data.
For example, I mean, one of the problems that was with COVID was the data coming out of China and that it just wasn't trustworthy, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's a word that is at the centre of what we're talking about, and actually what we've been talking about all day, which is trust. You do have trust in the authorities. I mentioned, the first rule of crisis management is stop doing stupid stuff. So now I'll talk about Brexit, which of course was probably one of the most stupid political decisions made, certainly in my lifetime. But Michael Gove, who was a government minister at the time, was asked, why is it that every single economist says that this will have a negative impact on the UK, whereas you say that it won't? And he said, to be honest, we've had enough of experts, which was a really stupid thing to say. And so what we have is, I think we've seen a polarization in the world. Like you said, I mean, somebody mentioned that on the presidential, the Republican Democratic, sort of Republican presidential things they were doing, only one would admit that climate change was real. We have a stupidification of the world as well at the same time. This is one of the paradoxes we have. If you have a problem with climate change, stop burning down the Amazon. Stop burning down the Amazon. That's the first one. I don't know if you've seen, but the Chinese now want to do deep ocean mining of the ocean floors. The first, and we know nothing about the ecological system, except we'll have massive disruption. And so I think what we need to do again is to try to have that influence, impact, and legacy, and to have trusted voices. The question is industry the trusted voice? Do we trust big pharma? Do we trust big financial organizations? Do we trust these big global organizations? Do we believe that they have the best interests of the world at heart? And I think that we have to go through some sort of recalibration or realignment, because at the moment, the system itself is not working. And the idea that we have these new tools coming in, like AI, for example, the likelihood is that a small group of people will get control of that, and we'll see increased polarization around the world. And I think that builds in part of the cycle. So I think that we're in that spin part of the cycle. We just have to go through this and come out. We just have to go through this and come out. But I think that trust is a significant issue, because if you look at the big organizations, I don't think they're worthy of trust myself. I don't think they are trustworthy organizations, and that's part of the problem we have.
Right, thank you, and Dave.
Yeah, I agree with that, Dave. I think the other thing is they can control the narrative.
Yes.
And I think that's incredibly important and incredibly powerful. And academics don't control the narrative. generally. Big business control the narrative, government to extent can control the narrative. Academics tend not to have that power to start with. I think, to be honest, even if they got it, they probably wouldn't know what to do with it. So I think there's the opportunity there to really think about or reconceptualize that academic knowledge and how you translate that. I think that's incredibly important, how you communicate it.
I've got a couple of questions I'd like to ask that have been received, and it goes back to the point that Justin actually made earlier. One actually just came in, which I'll ask from Catherine Strods. Yeah. Okay, David, do you think that a portion of empirical research that is contradictory to other research is due to deliberate cherry picking for ulterior motives?
That's me. We've had the politicization of academic research. There's no question about it. You look at most of the academic research done around health and obesity. It's funded by food companies. You look around the chemical companies. You look at what work is being done around pollution. It's being funded by oil companies. When we talk about wicked problems, there's now a new class called super wicked problems, which is an academic discussion. It has four criteria. I can't remember what they're off the top of my head, but basically, as Toby Harris was talking about, Lord Harris was talking about in his introduction, basically the four criteria of super wicked problems is: A, we're not paying attention, we think we can sort it out. B, we think that we will have a magic solution at some stage. C, we kick the problems down the road, and we try and move it down to the generation. But the fourth one is that the people who create the problems say they're the ones to bring the solution. And I don't trust that, I don't believe that. To go back to a point that somebody made, I think it was Julian made, you brought up the 6-point wicked problems. There are 10, under the 1973 Ricker-Weber paper, there are 10 principles of wicked problems. The first 9 are technical, but the 10th is the simplest. And the 10th principle of wicked problems is the planner has no right to be wrong. Being wrong has consequences. And that means there's a certain responsibility. And that becomes ethical, spiritual, moral. And what I think is we're missing that part of it. We see bad people making bad decisions. We see good people making stupid decisions. And I think we have to bring back a certain level of morality, because we have actually put the future of humanity into the hands of probably less than 2,000 people on the planet. And they actually hold the future of humanity in their hands. And they're doing bad things. And I think until we recalibrate that, then we're fighting against the wave. And if you think you wait after a couple of beers this evening, then see.
Oh, sorry. Didn't hear it.
More realistic. More realistic.
Just like that today.
So just briefly, I think it's also the way the academic journals work globally actually. Journals tend to not accept null findings. So a lot of times, if it's a replication that's already been replicated a couple of times, they're less likely to accept that journal in the peer review process, or if they showed no significant findings. So there's a lot of kind of structural things at play. Listen, I played a role. I got funding through the Obama administration to test whether tasers create cognitive impairments with a colleague of mine, and we rented out a hospital, and we tased 200 students in the hospital, and then had them we conducted a number of neuropsychological tests: memory, concentration, speed of learning. But some of them hit a heavy bag, and then we tased them, because some people who are tased are physically exerting themselves. Some just got tased. Some just sat. Anyways, the point is that that research, my colleague had done consulting with Taser International. He's a very smart colleague, but he felt like he could keep things straight. I had not done consulting work with Taser International. The Attorney General in the US said, "Can you keep this straight and keep above board?" We said yes. The first thing my colleague did was hired Ho and Dawes, the chief medical officers for Taser International, to be the consultants on our RCT. It created a major rift between me and my colleague. We had a falling out. We published the findings, we never talked. After that, we spent all Christmases together. But actually, so it's conflicting. He thought that it was going to, them being involved were going to actually improve. And actually, truth be told, there was one thing they advised us on, which was that we were going to have the probes like 19 inches away. And actually, the median distance for the probes is like 14 inches. So if we had done it our way, that would have invalidated all of our findings, which is interesting. So their involvement actually did play a role, but it's complicated. Yeah.
But a follow-up question as well we received earlier from Anonymous. There's a controversial question here. Do you find that some universities have monetized academia to the point that degrees are becoming far easier to obtain?
I had this awful feeling everyone was going to suddenly look to their right.
Well, I think some of the universities have a policy where you can't fail more than 10% of your students. So I think that's, and remembering I did a finance subject and 2% of the students passed, only 2%, and then there was an uproar, so they upgraded the marks and 5% passed, and that was it, but now it is at least 90% of people have to pass. So I think there is definitely some merit in that question.
Universities are businesses, and they operate along those lines. It's as simple as that.
So it leads us to the last question, because I believe we have 7 minutes to go. We're actually doing pretty well here. The last question is, sorry for that, Justin. Last question is, it actually builds on that one, funny enough. So where to next for social science and public policy research? What's the next step then?
All right, I'll keep this to a minute. I think that we need to be comfortable sharing unorthodox ideas with research partners in industry and constantly disagreeing with one another in that comfortable space. And then I'll just say that we need to explore the mechanisms behind why something works or doesn't work, looking inside the black box. So often we do this as a treatment, a program, but we don't understand what is the mechanism in there. I'm working with YouChoose, a group that works on road safety with youth, and they've rejected the idea of scaring kids out of non-drink driving. They're focusing on the issue of passive risk-taking in peer groups, because what they're finding and what our data is kind of showing is that kids that are too passive in peer groups a lot of times won't speak up. So it's the idea of keep having a pact saying, I love you, mate, I'm not going to let you do this. I think that's interesting, those types of collaborations where you dig deep and see what's behind the curtain.
Yeah, just as
I was just going to add to that. I think also to get an application through the Human Ethics Research Committee can be horrendous, and I think a lot of research is being put off because of the process, and you already know that you're not going to get accepted. For example, I had to interview people on bail, and they were classified as vulnerable people, and I thought, well, if I'm sitting with somebody's on bail for murder, then who's the vulnerable person here? But so we had to go through all these motions to actually get that research approved. So I think that's definitely one of the barriers, and they seem to be becoming worse and worse in not really thinking about is this valid research, but more about what's the vulnerabilities, what they need to be more realistic in the research we want to do, and looking at the outcomes rather than at the processes itself.
Just going to say, in that space, and it goes to what both Justin and Margo were saying, did something work? So if you think about it in governments in particular, you'll do an evaluation, you'll procure an evaluation, get academics to come in and say, did it work? I think increasingly people are becoming more sophisticated around what works means. Take for example, if the goal is reduce drug taking, with someone's taking speed 5 days a week and they drop back to marijuana 2 nights a week, that's probably a win, right? So did it work, as opposed to they went from speed 5 days, 6 days a week to sudden abstinence. So I think when we think about does it work, I think industry's starting to become, or we need to become a little bit more savvy around that. And encouragingly, what I'm seeing is a trend around things like realist evaluation, where it's about if you're going to evaluate a program, what part of it worked, who did it work for, what were the outcomes, and importantly, what were the unintended outcomes? Because the very nature of wicked problems is that you create unintended outcomes. And quite often there's programs that create unintended outcomes. So if you take an evaluation approach, for example, that does that, as opposed to the old standard, process evaluation and pre-post sort of model, you really start to dig into, as Justin was saying, figure out what are the mechanisms, because you can replicate those and you can build them into new programs. And I think increasingly we're starting to see research be procured in that sort of vein. It's not just about did it work black and white, it's trying to understand and unpack what really happened.
I'm actually on the board of a EU program called BUILD, Building Universities for Leading in Disaster Resilience. We've just completed the first stage the first 3 years of a program under EU funding. It's now gone privately funded in Indonesia, which of course has incredible strategic risk and crisis management challenges. But we're working with 8 universities and setting up each university as a centre of excellence. And each university has 3 vectors it's working through. The first vector is upwards to helping support effective policy making at government level. Second vector is downwards into community leadership and empowerment. And the third vector is outwards into creating stakeholder engagement issues. We're working with the International Federation of the Red Cross at the Under Secretary General Javier Castellanos, the number 2 person. But they're working with us to create a community leadership program. They want to get 10,000 people through over the next 3 years. We're getting there in 150 countries. It's only 20 people a country a year, and you're up to 10,000 people. So I think we can find a way of getting this into the real world. And I think that's where the challenge is, where the utility is. Show me the benefit. And I think more and more that is happening. And just to say, if I might, in collaboration with Gav and the chapter here and to risk to solutions in the resilience program here. As part of this, the launch of the Centre for Study of Wicked Problems, we're funding a 6-month paid consultancy, paid, it's a paid internship, thank you, paid internship. So we're going to be bringing somebody in for 6 months on a paid basis to basically just concentrate on doing this and working together with Gav and the network to see if we can push this forward. We're doing the same thing with our partners in Belgrade, the United Nations University. We're doing the same things in Saudi, where I'm going to be in a couple of weeks' time. And we hope that is the beginning of little dots, which can then join up and create that network. As the phrase says, we have to be part of the solution. We can't just sit here and talk about it. We have to actively try and create the future as we wish it to be. And to go back all the way to the 60s, Marsh McLuhan, think global, act local. And I think we try and make a difference where we are.
Time.
I'm just standing here to start making you uncomfortable.
Nice to be a prison officer, that's not going to work. Just a couple more questions that actually come in. And it sort of builds again on some of the points that were raised. How will universities working with third-party contractors actually change that landscape that you've actually just discussed?
The problem is universities are not good at making decisions. We've been through this so many times. And we were actually working with Ernst & Young, and they were going to sponsor a module. They were going to sponsor a complete module at the master's level, University of Portsmouth. I had a meeting with them together with the university people. They sent an email back saying, really interested, we'd like to talk to you. And said, we are now in break until September. We'll come back to you in 9 weeks' time. That was the end of that conversation. And I think one of the frustrations I have as somebody who tries to bridge the world of academia and industry is that the decision-making universities is not designed to interact with decision-making with industry. And until you get that bit right, then the conversation just disappears into the clouds. And you've got to, as the Americans say, you've got to nail the jelly to the table. You've got to get something done. So I think the desire's there, but I think it's just, as in so many cases, just getting it gripped and getting something done. That's the challenge.
Sorry.
There is something liberating about being an outsider. When I do my commercial contact research, I've done work with New Zealand police around the mosque shootings, and thinking about streamlining management of critical incidents. I've done some work around street gangs in Queensland. And whenever I'm finishing up those evaluations for police leadership, police executives, when I get to the conclusion section, I feel a sense of relief because not internal. When you're internal to an organization, it's really hard to make recommendations that recommend changing the status quo. But I think that there is something about an external person saying, here are my recommendations, and you can kind of push the limits a little bit in that space. And I have found that the ACs that I was working with that I push those recommendations to, sometimes you don't need 11 recommendations to stick. All you need is one thoughtful idea to rethink how we engage family members or gang members or something like that. It's just one thoughtful idea that triggers that operational change.
And just drawing both David and Justin's points together can be incredibly difficult working with universities because they do work to academic calendars, which do not operate in the real world. But you can build relationships with specific academics because they are available 52 weeks of the year, usually, probably more. Some work more than that, I'm sure, Justin. But yeah, if you can build relationships with specific academics in the areas that you're in, you'd be surprised how far a cup of coffee can get you.
Closing statement, if I can throw to you.
Well, I was just going to say the problem that academics have, they have to teach. Because most of us work on a 40-40-20, so 40% teaching, 40% research, 20% service, and that's where the time when they come to. We can't get out of teaching. We don't all want to teach, but we do have to teach. And then coming back to what Justin was saying about the recommendations, the Queensland government, I actually say which government. Anyway, they don't actually want the word recommendations because recommendations they have to implement. So now we have moved to suggestion. And I actually worked on one commercial evaluation. They already had the outcome they wanted, but the outcome didn't coincide with the findings they had. So they did go ahead with what they wanted, but it was in complete contradiction with the findings. It was on the news, ABC. Findings were different to what we had. So the bonding trial with the Queensland Police Service, you'll find that our findings were somewhat different because it didn't actually reduce a knife crime. It has caused displacement effects. But I think that was definitely one of the interesting where you see that academia and practitioners don't always work together.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wind up now. I did receive a couple more questions, but that's another half an hour discussion there, and I'm not going to stand between people and their lunch of Dave breathing down my throat. So if I could thank our esteemed panel here on behalf of everyone present here today. Thank you.